Delray is right. Forbes called me one of the top crowdfunding and Jobs Act experts. And let me get this little clicker to work here. Inc. magazine called me one of the top 19 crowdfunding experts that all startups need to know. And VentureBeat called me one of the top 30 influential leaders in the crowdfunding industry. And after all of these things came out, the first question I had was, are there 30 people in the crowdfunding industry? I have no idea. So the bottom line is, this is me. I am a Jobs Act and crowdfunding attorney, which basically, when Forbes called me the only one, I mean, one of the top in the country, I really was the only one in the country at the time. Now, almost every major law firm now has developed a practice in this area, because for 4 years I've been talking about this, writing about this, and people thought I was clinically insane for the first 3 years. And now that the law is actually out there and working, people are going to it in droves. Little quick history, 27 years as a practicing attorney. I like to call myself the LIS. I'm usually the lawyer in sweatpants. Today I'm wearing my lawyer costume, but if you see me most of the time, I'm probably the least lawyer-like lawyer you'll ever see. I am a columnist for Entrepreneur Magazine. I write their crowdfunding and Jobs Act column. And like Delray said, just about every major media has had me in them for some reason. Not because I have a face for radio, but I will talk to anybody. And I like to spread the word about these laws and let people know how great they are. Crowdfunding has grown exponentially. I mean, this is a brand new industry that didn't exist 5 years ago. It turned into a $7 billion industry in 2013, $16 billion industry in 2014, $34 billion industry in 2015. It didn't exist in 2008 when the financial crisis exists, and it came out of the financial crisis, getting the money into the hands of companies, out of the hands of banks, out of the hands of Wall Street, and into the hands of the people. Before we get to what I really do and what we're talking about today with the Jobs Act and equity crowdfunding, let me give you a quick little background on rewards. Rewards crowdfunding is Kickstarter. Rewards crowdfunding is the things that people have heard about. I start off by talking about this $10,000 watch. So this is a Breitling $10,000 watch. Mine costs like 10 bucks. I got it at the MARTA stop over here when I got off the thing from a guy in a suitcase. That's a $10 million watch. This is the Pebble watch. This is what broke the crowdfunding industry wide open. A bunch of inventors decided they were going to come up with a watch that would sync with your iPhone, sync with your computer, sync with all of your electronic devices. It was the first smartwatch. They went out and they said, we need to raise $100,000 to make something that doesn't exist yet. We're going to create this, and in 6 months, if you give us $150, we'll send you a watch that we haven't even made yet. Now, if I said that to my grandmother, she would hit me with her cane, because who does this? But back in 2009, 2010, this was brand new. They raised $10 million from 68,000 people who understood what they were doing, and all of a sudden, everyone's eyes open. The Wall Street Journal is writing about it. The New York Times is writing about it, and everyone comes to me and says, what is this? And that's how I ended up in all this major media. So you have two different kinds of crowdfunding. You have rewards crowdfunding, which is things like Kickstarter, GoFundMe, and Indiegogo. And then you have equity crowdfunding, which we'll talk about in a minute. Rewards crowdfunding, basically, you're not giving away any part of your company. You're taking money from donors. They call them donors. They donate money to you. You give them something in return, maybe a t-shirt, maybe a mention on your Facebook page, maybe a product that you're creating, maybe a credit in a movie that you're making. But they don't own any part of your company. The company and the individual who are raising the money get to keep all of the money. It's all theirs. You're not sharing the profits with them. It's a phenomenal way for someone, especially with a product, to test the market, to see if they have something people are interested in, to refine what they're doing, and to raise some money without giving away a single piece of your company. Now, equity crowdfunding is something that's relatively new. Here, investors actually do the same thing. They go on a website, they watch a video, they see all the information, but they actually receive stock or equity in your company. You're selling it just like you would sell stock or equity in a private placement, except you're doing it online. And of course, investors share in the profits of your company. So let's talk about equity crowdfunding. I'm going to give you a success story. This is the biggest success story in equity crowdfunding to date, internationally, anywhere. It's a company called BrewDog. BrewDog has raised to date, through crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, where they sold shares in their company online in the UK, more than 26 million pounds, over $35 million, from 46,000 individual investors who average a minimum of a 95-pound investment in their company for 2 shares of this company. What have they done? They've built this monstrous brewery. They're now the largest craft brewer in the UK, probably in Europe at this point. They've opened 44 brew pubs, all of which across the world. They're in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, as well as in the UK, all of which are profitable. They now employ over 650 people internationally. This all started with crowdfunding. They're the top-selling craft beer, the fastest-growing food and drink company in the UK 4 years in a row. Solidly profitable every single year since they started. And it all went not because they borrowed money from the bank, not because they got investors from institutions, not friends and family money. It all came from individual investors online. They're coming to America. They're going to test the Jobs Act. They're going to do a Regulation A+ offering. It's with the SEC right now. I know that because I filed it. They're going to be on Bankroll. They're building this brewery in Columbus, Ohio. They're going to try to take over the craft beer market here in the United States, just like they did in the UK. The interesting thing about this is, BrewDog, that's a picture on the right that was taken about 2 months ago. They're building the brewery already. They don't need the money. They're paying cash to build their own brewery here from their UK profits. But they're doing it here because A, why not raise the money? Why not bring in more money and open more brew pubs and employ more people across the country? But also, think about it. They have 46,000 brand ambassadors in the UK. 46,000 people who are out there holding up pictures of their beer on Facebook and Twitter and going to their pubs and telling their friends that they invested in this company. They've never paid a dime for advertising. Not a dime. All of it came through spreading viral messages through Facebook, through Twitter, and through media coverage. These guys are in the media 2 to 3 times a day in Europe because of the publicity stunts and things they do. You're going to be seeing a lot about them here because they're going to be doing a lot of the same kind of stuff. So let's talk about the Jobs Act. First part of this I want to talk about is Title II. Title II of the Jobs Act is what I call accredited investor crowdfunding. Basically, these are private placements. These are the things you guys, some of you are involved in them right now, some of you have done them in the past. The difference is you do it online. You show a video, you have all your documents online in a deal room, people actually invest online. Everything takes place through a crowdfunding website or a Jobs Act website. There's some very good things about this law. There's no limit on the amount of money you can raise, just like in any private placement. You can advertise online. You can generally solicit people through general solicitation, social media, advertising. It's the most affordable of all the Jobs Act provisions to use. Now, there are some downsides. You're limited to accredited investors. You can only go to folks that meet the standard of an accredited investor, just like you would if you're in a regular private placement. There are some additional legal requirements if you do it online over a regular private placement. And as we all know, one of the reasons we're all here is it's hard to access private money and investments. One of the reasons that I agreed to join Delray and First Look is these types of meetings for private placements, whether they are done through traditional means where you're in the room and you hand somebody their PPM and you have them sign the documents and you keep it all secret, or whether you do it online where you're showing it to people and you're doing videos and it's all done online, you still need relationships. You still need to talk to people. Accredited investors aren't going, wow, I'm really impressed with this offering. Let me wire you $250,000. It doesn't happen. They still want to talk to you. They still want to meet you. They still want to sit down with you. They need that interaction. And that's why these types of meetings, the road shows, the things that you did for private placement, apply just as much to this online method with accredited investors. And that's why I'm here and part of First Look. Now, it's going to be a little different with some of the other parts of crowdfunding where we'll talk about that when we get to them. By the way, new numbers that just came out from the SEC last week. Since this part of the Jobs Act went into effect, there has been $50 billion that have gone through 506C offerings. Now, that's a fraction of what's gone through the regular private placement world, but that's a hefty amount of money in 2.5 years. So this is working. It works, but you have to do it right. Here's some secrets to it. And I'm going to give you 3 or 4 of these because I sort of touched on this. The relationships are very important. But for these things to work, what we've seen over the last 3 years is just throwing this up online and saying, hey, accredited investors, come here and invest in this. It doesn't work. There's no magic that happens. First thing that I tell people is try to engage a lead investor. Find that one person who's sort of a point man that people will follow. The success rate, if you can engage a lead investor on one of these online, is phenomenal. Because when you see a name, a real name or a real lead investor that comes in, people follow them automatically. And so it can magically grow your money. But as I said, accredited investors are very hesitant to do this online. And so it still requires the contact. It still requires you to sit down with someone, meet with them, talk to them on the phone, and sell them on your investment. They want to see you, they want to hear you, they want to feel you, they want to touch you. That's why all of you are here presenting or listening, because that's how you sell these investments. When you're asking somebody to write a big check, they want to see you, touch you, feel you, know what your product is. They want to see the demo. They want to see it in person. It's a little different with some parts of the online stuff we're going to talk about. But for these deals particularly, you really have to have that contact. That's why we're doing these, and that's why we're going to expand across the country doing these with First Look. So let's talk about another part of the Jobs Act called Title III. Title III is what the Jobs Act was all about in the media. This was basically startups are going to be able to go online and do something just like Kickstarter and raise up to $1 million selling equity in their company. It's going to be the magic cure for startups needing money now that the banks won't lend them anything. So Title III was passed along with the rest of the Jobs Act in April of 2012. The law actually said this law needs to go into effect. The SEC has to put rules into effect for this to happen by the first day of 2013. The SEC passed the rules to actually make this happen in October of 2015. Now, I think if any of us had a law, federal law that applied to us and said, hey, if you don't do something by a certain date and we didn't do it and we waited 3.5 years to do it, we'd probably be in federal prison. The SEC said, we'll get to it when we do. Whenever we want to, we'll make it happen. October 2015, they passed the rules, and this law will actually finally go into effect May 16th, in about 3 weeks. People are going to actually be able to use this law for the first time. So what does this law do? A company can raise up to $1 million on something brand new called a funding portal. This is created by this law. It's a regulated, FINRA-regulated, SEC-regulated funding portal. You have to register. You basically become a mini broker-dealer. FINRA is going to come in and look at your books. FINRA is going to come in and make sure your records are in place, but you have to be a funding portal. You cannot do this on your own website. You cannot do this on Kickstarter or any of the reward sites. You have to go to a registered funding portal. But you can sell stock to anyone, not just accredited investors. You can sell to Joe the plumber. You can sell to anyone who wants to invest in your company. There is no limitation whatsoever on who can invest. There's no state-by-state blue sky law compliance. So you don't have to go to 50 different state regulators, get their permission, get their consent, and make sure that they say it's okay to sell in their state. All you do is you go on a funding portal, you put it up there, and you have no state-by-state blue sky law compliance, which saves millions of dollars in legal and compliance fees. There's no requirement of audited financials. Some people thought when this law was presented that you're going to have 2 years of audited financials to do this. The SEC said no. If it's the first time you're doing it, you don't have to have them. Now, this complicated formula, which I haven't even bothered to try and memorize, is how investors are limited. What the SEC said was, if we're going to let people do this, we want to protect the little guy. We want to make sure grandma doesn't take her nest egg and give it to some company that's just a startup because of the inherent nature that startups are risky. So they created this formula that if you make a certain amount of money and your net worth and you kind of figure it out, it's got a lot of ifs, ands, or buts in it. But basically it comes down to you can invest up to 5% of your income or net worth or $2,000. Anybody can do that. So there's limitations, which is good to protect investors in what inherently are going to be risky investments. Now there's some big problems with this. I like putting up my Ruh-Roh picture of Scooby-Doo when I talk about the problems with this law because it sounds like a great law. There's a huge problem with the way this law is written, and that is the thing that makes crowdfunding work, the thing that made BrewDog be able to get 46,000 investors and let the Pebble Watch get 68,000 people giving them money was social media, was Twitter, was Facebook, was viral videos, spreading the word. The SEC, I shouldn't say the SEC, it was really a combination of the SEC and Congress in their ultimate wisdom, decided you're not going to be able to generally solicit other than putting up a tombstone ad. Hi, I'm Allegiancy. We're raising $30 million. Click here to get more details. Boy, if I see that on my Facebook page, I'm excited. They took the fun out of it. They took the solicitation out of it, and quite frankly, for no apparent reason. I mean, the key is they're worried about investors. They're trying to protect them. But the reality is, before you can invest, you got to read all these things. You got to go through these disclaimers. That law is going to ultimately be changed. But right now, huge limitations of what you can do to invest or to present. This is a bigger problem. Part of crowdfunding is building your crowd before you start. Going out and teasing the audience, basically saying, hey, we're going to be investing money. Check out this cool video. Check out our product. You know what? On May 1st, we're going to start this. Get excited. Sign up here. May 1st, you're going to be able to invest. Getting the crowd riled up and excited and generally building this crowd before you start. The most successful crowdfunding campaigns and projects all have 25 or 30% of their goal get reached before they even launch. They have people ready to go. They're ready to roll. Day one, boom, you see them go from 0 to a huge number really quickly. Pebble Watch raised $1 million in 45 minutes the second time that they did their crowdfunding campaign. 45 minutes, because they had them ready to go. With Title III, if you go out and start telling people you're going to do a crowdfunding campaign before you're registered on a funding portal, you have just committed securities violations. Now, that is insane. It makes no sense in the world of why can't you tell people I'm going to be doing something and be regulated by the normal regulations. These shares aren't tradable. They're like private shares. They're restricted, so people have no market for them. You're going to hold these shares for a while. The law is too expensive for startups. It's built for startups, but you've got some regulatory issues. You're going to have to probably hire an attorney. There's a whole lot of things that go on that make this law too expensive. And the biggest problem with the law is, although I tend to agree that this is the way it should be written, is it's an all or nothing offering. You go out there and you say, I need to raise $1 million, and you only raise $950,000, you don't keep a penny of it. Now, you just spent probably $50,000 to $100,000 on legal fees, compliance fees, marketing, accounting. All that's out the drain. It's gone. All lost. Huge problem with the law, but one that's fixable. So let's talk about the law that I really want to talk about, the good one. Title IV, the mini IPO, Regulation A+, what Steve Sadler and Allegiancy are doing, and he and I are going to talk about the realities of this law and give you sort of an in-the-trenches view of that right after I'm done here. Let me give you a little history. This is not a new law. Regulation A existed for years and years and years. Regulation A was a law that lets you go out and raise $5 million rather, in basically an IPO. You could go to general public and raise the money, didn't have to go to accredited investors, but you had to comply with every state's blue sky law. So think about it. You're going to spend millions of dollars on legal fees and compliance fees and accounting fees to go 50 states where, in the state of Washington, the securities regulator might tell you, we don't like this part of your, what you're doing. And the state of Montana might tell you, we don't like this part. And you had to figure out how to get all 50 of those together so you had a coherent offering that made sense. You're talking about hours and days and months of getting approval and huge amounts of money. GAO said there was only one Regulation A offering in 2011, to give you an example of how little this law was used. In the same amount of time, there were almost 8,200 private placements that would have been in the same category, same fit. So this law was terrible. It was a dud. They changed the law. They fixed it. There's now 2 tiers, and we call it Regulation A+. The first one is, this is Tier 1. You can raise up to $20 million online. You can sell to anyone, not just accredited investors. There's no limit under Regulation A, Tier 1, on how much an investor can invest. You still have to comply with blue sky laws, but I'll tell you why in this particular case, in limited circumstances, it's not a bad idea. And there's no requirement of audited financials. This law was set up for a local business. If you wanted to open up a pizza parlor down the road here on Peachtree, this is what this law was set up for. You only register in the state of Georgia. You only sell to people in the state of Georgia. You only market to people in the state of Georgia. So you only have one state blue sky law to deal with. You don't have audited financials. You don't have limits on how much people can invest, and you can market to your local community and raise money from regular people. So I'm going to show you an example of one that just closed where they did this very effectively in a little while. Tier 2 is really what this is all about. This is what Allegiance's using. This is what Brewdog's using. There's over 100 of these that have been filed with the SEC as of today. There are, I think, 7 or 8 that are actively raising money right now. There have been, I think, a couple of dozen that have been qualified. Steve used the term approved, which the SEC tells us very clearly, we don't approve anything. If you tell people the SEC approved this, you have done something very seriously wrong. So we're always very careful to say they don't approve it. But what they do is they review what you send them, and they see if it meets the criteria, and they qualify it. So once the SEC qualifies your offering, you're allowed to go out and raise up to $50 million from the general public. You can sell to anyone, not just accredited investors. There's no blue sky law compliance. You don't have to go to each state and get their approval. There are some filings you have to make, some notice filings and things like that, but there's no compliance where it just holds you up forever. Non-accredited investors are limited to 10% of their income or their net worth per offering, so there is a limitation to protect, the everyday investor on how much they can put into these. And it does require 2 years of audited financials, which can be a very expensive thing to do in some cases. However, I will tell you, many young and emerging businesses, it's, first of all, if you're already reporting, if you're already on the pink sheets or doing things like that, you can still use this. You can use Regulation A+ if you're not a fully reporting company. So you can be, a registered company that's not fully reporting and use this. You already have your audited financials in place generally to do that. Newer companies, it can be an expense, but we've found CPAs, very, very competent people that are doing these for $5,000 and under, for small, newer companies. So what's good and what's bad about it? The good thing is you can raise up to $50 million from the general public. You can advertise. You can solicit. You can put this on Facebook. You can put this on Twitter. You can spread it through whatever. You can skywrite. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't mislead people. The stock is immediately liquid, which is a huge deal. Now, is there a market for it? You can take this and you can list it on the OTC. If you qualify, you can list it on NASDAQ. You can do whatever you want to trade it once you're out and done. It's totally liquid. If you don't list it, you can privately sell the shares. If there's somebody that wants to buy them, you can sell them. It's much cheaper than a regular IPO because it's smaller and limited. And it's not all or nothing. As long as you have a reasonable basis for what you're doing, you can take money from the first dollar that's coming in. So it's not an all or nothing offering. Now, it's too expensive for most startups. There are ongoing reporting requirements with the SEC that make it a little bit expensive over time. You do become a semi-public company. For some people, that's a big deal. They don't want people to know all of their details and everything that's going on. And you do need the 2 years of audited financials, which can be expensive. This law went into effect in June of last year, so we're less than a year into it. And there are people that are, right at the forefront of it, like Steve and Allegiance, who are learning how this works and making mistakes and doing things right and figuring it out as we all go along. But those of us who are trailblazing through it, we have a few examples now to be able to show people. The first one, probably the most highly publicized, is Elio Motors, which ran out a campaign called a Testing the Waters campaign. There's something that you're allowed to do with this that's kind of a unique situation. I don't recommend it in most cases, but you can go out and ask people if they're interested in investing. So Elio Motors spent about $250,000 testing the waters on marketing. They went out and they went full out because they were the first ones to do this. They wanted to see how much are people going to be interested in this? They got back $46 million of indicated interest. Wow. They almost hit the limit. That was great. Spent a lot of money getting there. Then they had to wait 6 months for the SEC to qualify their offering. In their SEC filing, they said, we really want to raise $25 million. Now, the reality is they raised $17 million. That's a huge success story, by the way. First people to ever use this law raised $17 million from the general public. The problem is, if they had spent that $250,000 maybe marketing the offering rather than doing this thing 6 months before and letting the leads get cold, maybe they would have raised double that. Who knows? So it's an interesting thing to look at, and that's part of what you need to really think through when you're doing these. This one's live right now. VirtuX Omni. Virtual reality system, really cool stuff. They did a Testing the Waters campaign also, $30 million of indicated interest. all right? Again, it's really easy to get somebody to say, yeah, I'd love to invest in your business. I'm going to give you X number of dollars. But when it comes to them filling out the paperwork and wiring the money, it's a totally different story. Their goal is $10 million to date, and they've really in very, very early stages of this, they've raised, I think as of this morning, $4.6 million. So again, it shows this works, but that testing the waters thing just really, think about it. Do you really want to be out there being the guy who says, well, I only raised 1/7 of what I thought I was going to raise? The reality is, on Bankroll, we've done one testing the waters campaign, and we don't publish the numbers because I know they're not real. I know they're not realistic, and I don't want people to have unrealistic expectations of what's going to happen. Here's a failure story, all right? Let me show you this is a big failure of the Regulation A+ world, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a company called Sun Dental. Now, Sun Dental is actually a very strong company. They do very well. Florida-based digital dental company. They do all kinds of different things involving dental practices. Very, very good company. $20 million in revenues. They did a horrible Regulation A+ offering for several reasons. Number one, their video was almost unwatchable. They had this video that was literally, I couldn't watch the whole thing. It was just very, very poorly done. Video is very important to grab people in the general public. They're going to watch a minute to a minute and a half. If you're not grabbing their attention, if you're not doing, you got me excited about USA and wanting to help, you got to do that. You have to get something that grabs them. If you can't grab them, you're not going to make any money. They marketed to the wrong audience. One of the things Steve and I are going to talk about when we talk in a few minutes here is some of these Regulation A+ offerings are not for the general public, okay? The average Joe probably doesn't care about what Sun Dental does. And it's really hard to explain to them why they should invest a small amount of money in that company. On the other hand, their business would have been perfect for a broker-dealer network. Running this thing out there through a syndicate, going to people that are not necessarily accredited investors, but that are investors that invest normally, it would have been a good deal for them. They needed to raise $5 million as a minimum because they put a minimum on their offering. You don't have to, but they did. They also said, we got to get $10,000 a person, all right? Now, when you go to an average Joe out on the street and say your minimum investment is $10,000, what are the odds when you have a confusing product, when you have a video that people can't watch, that anyone's going to write you a check for $10,000? Different story if you're going through a broker-dealer network. And you have people going to their investors, explaining them, look, we looked at this, we vetted this, telling them the story, totally different story. They just did this totally wrong. They raised, I don't know the exact number, I've been told different numbers, but they ended up having to shut down their offering because they weren't coming close to meeting their minimum, and they just pulled it. Tons of lessons to be learned from this. Now, let me show you one of the Tier 1 offerings that just closed about 4 or 5 days ago. That is a weird-looking building that's going to be built in Portland, Oregon. This is the ad from a website for a Tier 1, in other words, local business, only in Oregon, maxed out at $20 million, but they only wanted to raise $750,000 to build this commercial office building. It's a company called Guerrilla Development. So they literally put up this thing online and said, hey, own a piece of your own neighborhood. We're building this here. We're going to rent it out, and we're going to give you an 8% return, $3,000 minimum investment. It's the perfect use of that local version. It's the pizza parlor out here on Peachtree. They did the exact same thing. They raised $750,000 plus in a very, very short period of time from local people. It shows that Tier 1 can work on a local level. So that's the end. Steve and I are going to come up here and sit down and talk a little bit more about how the guts of this thing really works and some of the ugly parts of it, some of the good parts of it. But I wanted people to have, if you need to reach me, the best way to reach me is by email. I'm also on Twitter. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me. Thank you, Delray, for having me here.